Hello, I'm the FanFic Critic. I read it. You listen. I can finally wear my jacket again! Yeah, the reason why I wasn't wearing my jacket for most of this season so far was because it was a tad too hot. But now that it's September, I can freely wear it. Unless we have another heat wave. We've been having a lot of that lately. I digress. Today we're taking a look at a Godzilla fanfiction. Joy oh joy! Like the preceding episode, this is not going to be on fanfiction.net. Instead, it's, again, on its own website, www.gfan.com. Woohoo! The fanfic is called Godzilla vs. Tiamatodon by Neil Reeby. Again, they use their real name, but I don't think this is going to be a self-insert. Thank God. Film appearances for the cast of characters. Miki Saigusa, I probably said the name wrong. Oh well. Godzilla vs. Biolante through Destroya, 1989 through 1995. Paleontologist Hironori Mazaki. Godzilla vs. King Ghidorah, 1991. UNGCC Director Takayuki Segawa. Godzilla versus... Okay, fuck this. Let's just read it. Okay. We're only going to be reading the first part of this story. It actually has 3 parts altogether, but obviously it's a little too long to be reading on the show. So I'm just going to read the first part, which in its own right is pretty decently lengthed. So let's not waste any time. Part 1. Robert Mills dropped anchor a mile or so off the Australian coast. Bondi Beach could be seen on the port side, where the sunbathers and beach lovers appeared to be about half the size of his thumb over the distance. His girlfriend, Heather Bianchi, I probably said that wrong, forgive me, leaned forward on the railing admiring the undulating sea toward starboard. Her bikini hugged close to her skin. "Look at it, will you?" she said. They say the reflection of the sun makes the waves look tipped with gold. Really, it looks silver." "It's the middle of the afternoon," Robert said. "Wait till the sun begins to set." He sat back and admired her while she continued to adore the Pacific in her own wistful silence. Heather was 24, half his age. Robert wasn't bothered by the age gap the way others were. As he saw it, he deserved her. He worked hard, made his money. Age had nothing to do with the ability to care for someone anyway. Yeah, say that when you die at the age of 90 when she's still in her 70s. And then she's pretty much heartbroken for 20 years. Well, then again, I am dating someone who's 9 years older than me. But hey, that's a lot better than 20 years or 30 years. Just saying. Besides, Heather cavorted herself around, acting as though her curvaceous body gave her the right to expect to have things handed to her. That made things even, right? So in other words, she's conceited. Oh wow, you got a winner there, buddy. Robert cocked his head for a moment. It was strange. He could feel that way, deserving a soft and smooth dark-haired lass as though she were a reward. And people try to say that men don't see women as sex objects. His parents certainly didn't raise him to think that way. He kicked the thought out of his head, chiding himself for being stupid on a beautiful day, and offered Heather a drink. She accepted. He went into the cabin. While he mixed a couple of Manhattans, he heard a deep-sounding thud and felt a disturbing reverberation drum, or a thrum I should say, through the ship. He puzzled at what it could be. Just as he was about to discount it, the thud came again, only softer, as if further away. Heather then called out from the deck, "Robert, come here!" He rushed up. Heather pointed out to sea. Panic was wild on her face. He looked. Immediately he dashed to reel in the anchor. The chain clinked on like seconds ticking away to doomsday. Out at sea, a massive, prehistoric head broke the surface. Anyone who had access to a TV knew that was Godzilla. But what were those rhythmic vibrations under the boat? It sounded as though it was heading for the shore. The answer came when Robert revved up the yacht and veered it back towards the coast. A second creature, identical to the first, rose out of the water, its black fins splitting the sea as it rose to its full height. The water rushed off its craggy back. "My God!" Heather yelled. "There are 2 of them!" No, actually, I thought there was 10 of them. Thank you, Captain Obvious. Robert saw the swimmers and sunbathers on the beach scramble for safety. His attention was not on them for long when he saw the second Titan turn his way. It wasn't the monster so much as the wave it threw in the boat's direction as its moving bulk shifted the sea. The wave struck the yacht, sweeping the chairs and fishing gear across the deck. Heather screamed, clinging to the railing for dear life. The beast unleashed a deafening roar. The world flipped upside down, became wet, violent. And then the 2 mutated Godzillasaurs milled about Bondi Beach for the next 45 minutes. Mikey Saigusa read in the report, exchanging what some zoologists suggest may have been mating calls before returning to sea, causing no further damage. The capsized yacht was unsalvageable, but the 2 Americans aboard were rescued, examined for injury, and then released. Miki had gained notoriety in her young life for her psychic ability. Oops, that was supposed to be a woman. Okay, I'll change my voice accordingly the next time she speaks. Her ability to sense Godzilla's whereabouts. She spent the last few years acting as sort of a Godzilla radar for the government. Paging through all the printouts, she scanned through reports similar to the first. 3 Godzilla-like creatures were sighted in the jungles of New Guinea, or New Guinea, whatever, I'm probably not saying it right. 1 came ashore on Wake Island, and the list went on and on throughout the South Pacific. She set the papers on Sagawa's desk. Takayuki Sagawa was the director of the UNGCC, the United Nations Godzilla Countermeasures Center headquartered in Tokyo. He was a trim man for his 60 years, his gray hair conservatively cut short and parted to the side. Also presented in Sagawa's office was Professor Hironori Mazaki. Mazaki was in his 40s, yet had an affable boyishness about his features. He had risen to preeminence in paleontology after the renowned Dr. Yamane retired. The professor had just returned from the digs in the Liaoning province, China, when the director contacted him and Ms. Saigusa. "I read the treatise Dr. Yamane wrote in the 1950s about Godzilla," Maki said. "He believed Godzilla was one of the many creatures like it. That makes sense, obviously. What doesn't make sense is that they look like him as he does today." "Exactly," Mizaki chimed in. "Godzilla is a theropod. Theropod dinosaurs don't have bulky bodies, upright postures, and a wild array of black plates. Godzilla's ninfork are much smaller, about the size of a large tyrannosaur. Their bodies are more streamlined and seathed in a smooth sheen of gray scales. The only way his kin can resemble him as he is seen now, they would need to have been exposed to the same nuclear tests, but," he interjected with an upraised finger, "tests have been conducted in that region of the Pacific since the 50s. If they were exposed to the same radiation, we should have seen them over the same period of time as Godzilla. We haven't, which suggests their mutations are recent. So where does that leave us?" he asked rhetorically, rubbing his hands together. "You don't think someone purposely subjected these animals to radiation?" Miki asked Sagawa. The director gravely nodded. Over the past few weeks, about 40 scientists and engineers have been reported missing throughout the world. Biologists, paleobiologists, nuclear physicists. The type of people needed to crew an operation to mutate the Godzilla source into monsters we've seen cropping up. Investigations have just gotten underway. There's not much I can tell you. Although in leading you to what we do know, I authorized a reconnaissance flight over Lagos Island, where Godzilla had come from. This is what the recon teams found. Segwa showed them aerial photos of a massive bunker nestled in the lush verdure of the tropical jungle. A large path appeared to have been beaten down on one end of the building. I can understand the scientific curiosity, Miyazaki said, but it blows my mind that someone would be that irresponsible. Where did they get the funding without leaking out their intentions? I'm hoping the answers will be found in this installation, Sagawa replied. You two are the only ones under the age of 50 who have been to Lagos. You understand best what we're dealing with. I hope you understand why I'm asking you to return there. Don't worry, Director. Miki smiled. I would have been disappointed if you hadn't asked us. Miki and Miyazaki hadn't just go to Lagos Island. Okay. They had gone back in time, arriving on the island in 1944 during the Second World War when their countrymen had a garrison stationed there. Okay, how did they travel back in time? Well, maybe it'll be explained. Time travelers from the Earth's future wanted to prevent Godzilla's mutation by moving him out of the South Pacific before he could wander into the nuclear testing sites of the 1950s. Miki and Miyazaki accompanied one of the time travelers, an independent-minded lass named Emi Kanyo, and her deceptively human android M11. Okay, how did they travel back in time? The night they arrived in Emi's sleek-looking time-traveling aircraft, the U.S. Navy pulverized the garrison position. Early the next morning, U.S. troops stormed the jungle. The Japanese had little to resist them with other than bayonets and bravery. They counterattacked and felt like wheat in the Americans' blistering gunfire. When it looked like every last one of them was going to join their brothers in arms who fell at the Guadalcanal, Bougainville, and Tara, Godzilla, then an ordinary dinosaur, raised his head through the trees and bellowed over the din. The machine guns and Gurans fell silent, and the open-mouthed faces of the Americans turned skyward. The next instant, their guns spat death at the giant archosaur that had lumbered onto the battlefield. Even then, Godzilla showed an uncanny level of resourcefulness. The human invaders were like mice under his feet. Unable to stamp them all out, he toppled the trees upon them with swipes of his tail. He pursued the Americans back to their landing zone on the beach, where the battleship scored direct hits to his head and chest. Only then he was stopped. Dripping blood, he returned to the jungle. After the battle, Miki and Miyazaki with Emi and M11 approached Godzilla. He lay on his side in pain. Even though physically he was so different to Miki's eyes, his soul was the same. She sensed it. To console him, she telepathically communicated her feelings. She could only hope this reptilian mind could conceptualize her sympathy. Emi was eager to get on with her work. The android M11 teleported him off Lagos to the northern Pacific using the teleporter aboard the time ship. Again, how do they have a time ship? However, the mission failed. Godzilla was exposed to radiation and mutated all the same. Okay, how exactly did this happen? Care to explain? The time travelers used tried to bring change. All they accomplished was fulfill destiny. Okay, you shouldn't say all they accomplished was to fulfill his destiny. As for others of Godzilla's kind, nothing was seen. What else the fauna of Lagos had in store would have to be discovered firsthand. Miki and Mizaki set sail aboard the Haruna-class destroyer equipped with a heliopad and a pair of helicopters. They saw little of each other as Miki was assigned to the bridge to keep her senses keen for the presence of Godzilla and other creatures like him. So, did they go back to their present time, or are they still in the past? The trip proved to be as peaceful as a tropical cruise. When the news circulated among the crew of the ship would be arriving at the island the next morning, they shared a collective sigh of relief. Anticipation made it hard for Miki to fall asleep that night. In time, sleep took its course. As she slept, she dreamt of two people existing in one body coming toward her out of a glowing red tide. The dream did not reveal much in detail for this being. It was black and undulated in a side-to-side motion as a serpent sliding across its belly on the ground. What else was certain in the dream was that those two individuals living in that strange body hated her, and their hate filled her with dread. Miki struggled to wake up, but the dream would not let her go. She felt as though a heavy weight was pressing down upon her chest, forcing her to remain asleep. Her breath restricted, her attempts to cry out failed. Finally, in sheer force of will, Miki bolted right up in her bunk. As her chest rose and fell, taking in much-needed air, she regained her composure. Now awake, she should have felt safe from those two phantoms that haunted her sleep. Instead, she could sense their presence outside, coming towards the ship. Throwing aside her sweat-soaked sheets, she took out the portal. There was nothing to see but the moonlit waves. Grabbing her robe, she ran up to the deck. Clutching the railing, she gazed across the ocean. Still nothing. Aside from the whirl of the engines, all was peaceful. Then the approaching evil arrived. For a moment, Miki blacked out. Within that instant, she saw the ship sailing beneath her, and deep down below in the sea, a massive creature with a long tapering tail passed beneath the boat. It was so far down, its passing did not disturb the surface. The vision ended as abruptly as the snap of a person's finger, and Miki came to, finding that she had collapsed upon the deck. Getting up, she scanned the sea again. Now the presence of the two hate-filled souls were far in the distance, heading away from the ship. Then two roars cried out softly from the horizon, one following and another in succession. They were shrill, vicious, and sounded like Godzilla. By sunup, Miki was still certain that the ship had a near brush with a sea creature, yet the beast seemed too sophisticated to be an animal. Neither could she figure out why she sensed the presence of two beings and yet only one body. Miki reported the creature to the captain anyway. It was the responsible thing to do. It swam under the ship, she said. Heading south. That's good, the captain replied. Because when we're done here, we'll be heading north for home. Later in the morning, one of the helicopters dropped Miki and Mizaki off on the beach with a squad of soldiers. The troops were qualified to deal with NBC disasters, nuclear, biological, or chemical. I thought they were talking about the disasters of the news station NBC. Whether it be a meltdown from a civilian power plant or an enemy attack. Colonel Yagato was the team leader, and Sergeant Namura was his assistant. The enclosed helmets and air ventilator packs made the white protective NBC gear everyone wore resemble spacesuits. So are they supposed to be back in present times? I mean, you need to clarify this, people. I guess so. I guess they are. The radios in the helmets were an open mic. What one said, everyone heard. Mizaki nudged Miki's arms. So, when was the last time we were here? 1944? He asked jokingly. Oh, oops, that was supposed to be you know what, fuck the voice acting. His voice sounded tinny over the speakers of the helmet. I suppose we should visit more often, she replied. Maybe every 25 years instead of 50. The island looks different, doesn't it? She added. The tides reshape the shore year-round, he explained. For safety's sake, Maki and Mizaki had also been issued sidearms. Colonel Yagato ordered everyone to check the dosimeters clamped to their wrists. The radiation reading was .086 milliroentgens or something like that. Whatever. Well, within tolerance of their protective suits. Next, the colonel gave a 3-minute briefing. The bunker is 2.5 kilometers inland, he said, stuffing his map back into his pouch. He then pulled out his machete from his pouch, which happens to be located in the front of his pouch. Keep in mind, it'll seem twice that. The colonel led the way into the jungle, hacking a trail. Along their path, large flowers stretched their petals in a splash of color. Startled birds flapped from the underbrush, and the wind picked up among the trees. However, the breeze could not be felt. The helmets muted the craving or the cawing of the birds. The sound of one's breath was more distinct. Even the beauty of the flowers had to be appreciated through the amber filter of the tinted faceplate. The group stepped out into a clearing and started up a rise. The ground was pitted with long, shallow gullies. Old trenches, no doubt. When Mizaki tugged Miki's sleeve and pointed towards a mossy grotto shrouded with undergrowth. Isn't that the cave where M11 stood with his relay camera? Yes, I think you're right, she said after studying the shape of the aperture of the rock wall. That was where the garrison commander had his command post. They split from the line to take a look. Yagato protested over the calm. Miki and Mizaki were too engrossed to care, forcing the squad to take 5 while they investigated. The android must have stood about there. Mizaki positioned himself to the left side of the cave, and then peered in with the camera. I remember, Miki said, switching on the light on top of her helmet. She shined the beam into the cave. She recalled the radios clustered on the tables against the right wall. The lanterns hanging from the hooks hammered into the ceiling, and frightened infantrymen huddled on the floor while the U.S. Navy bombarded the island. But those moments were gone, and all that was left was the dust floating in the beam of her headlamp. A little thump from the ground tapped the soles of her boots. Did you feel that? She asked Mizaki. What? The thump tapped again. That. Zagusta, Yagato's voice screamed over the headphones. Mizaki, come back into ranks. Now. The colonel stood waving them to get into cover. He then pointed into the jungle. A series of trees were wavering like tall grass. The thump tapped from the ground once more, this time much sharper. A lizard-like head wedged through the foliage, rising 15 feet above the soldiers. It swung back and forth, laying its reptilian eyes on one-armed men. Saliva glistened off a battery of teeth. Despite its size, the beast's movements hinted that it could be dangerously agile on its pair of chicken-toed feet. The small but muscular arms were poised and ready to rake the meat off a body with 10-inch long talons. Miki and Mizaki dropped back into the cave. It's an Allosaurus, Mizaki cried excitedly. The assault rifles capped off, sounding like a staccato string of notes. Brump, brump, bump, bump. The scaly hide of the beast merely flinched irritably along its flank. The Allosaurus whipped around in a sharp twist and lunged for one of the men on the sergeant's left. Assault rifle at the hip, Namura put his body between the carnivore and his subordinate, firing at the monster's mouth. Gleaming brass flickered out of the rifle chamber. A hole ripped into the wrinkled skin hanging from the Allosaur's throat. Another round pierced one nostril, spurting blood. Bits of the gums were pulped. The dinosaur jerked back as if it was sustaining repeated blows from a skilled boxer. It swung its mouth wide, letting out a sharp, whistling hiss. Out of reflex, Mackie capped her palms over the side of her head, even though covering her ears was impossible. The Allosaurus nimbly spun around, thumping the ground with its weight, and then bounced back into the jungle. The sergeant pursued, reloading his rifle as he went. Awestruck, Miki wanted another glimpse so much she neglected her own safety and burst from the cave, following after Nomura. Mizaki followed after the sergeant as well. As a paleontologist, his reasons were obvious. When they caught up with the sergeant, the only sign of the Allosaurus was a broken tree branch dangling in the distance. Upon their return, the colonel asked, "Can we expect more monsters like that?" "Count on it," Mizaki said. "I sensed the Allosaurus was familiar with us," Miki warned, "meaning it has eaten human flesh." As one, the soldiers looked at her. They then continued up the hillside and down the opposite slope into another patch of thick jungle. Sunshine was visible up ahead, revealing another clearing. One of the trees at the rim was clearly lurched forward, with an adult-sized stegosaurus clutching the trunk with its forepaws. Guns leveled. Mizaki rushed forward, pushing the rifle barrels down. "It's okay, he's a vegetarian." The bent tree strained to remain upright. In a crack of wood tissued, it crashed to the ground under the weight of the dinosaur. Miki followed Mizaki, who went on ahead. A whole herd of stegosauruses populated the clearing. A number of them were pig-sized juveniles. As soon as their mother felled a fresh tree, they trotted over with their mouths open, abandoning the one they were chewing, even though half the branches were still green with tender food. Mizaki cautioned Miki not to get too close as she approached the first stegosaurus that plopped into view. "Don't worry," she radioed back. "He doesn't mind us at all, I can sense it." She ran her hand across its side as she walked from one end to the creature to the other. The scaly hide felt pebbly through her gloves. Its back arched high above Miki's head, brandishing its breathtakingly array of diamond-shaped back plates, and then sloped back down to where the head was level with her waist. With its narrow snout, the stegosaurus fussily pruned the leaves, avoiding the touch of branches like a kid who eats his entire sandwich except for the crust. Miki knelt down and gently stroked its neck. "Hello, little fella," she said softly. He seemed small because his head could be held in both of her hands. The stegosaurus blinked, and its expression tensed, reflecting annoyance. She offered it a branch of full, lush leaves. In response, the stegosaurus stopped eating and lumbered to another part of the clearing. "Ornery old thing," Miki said, standing up, tossing the branch. Mizaki patted her shoulder. "Nice try. You won't be too amused either if someone poked at you while you were eating. It's amazing this pocket of Jurassic wildlife exists. Isn't it true that so long as an animal's nick of nature remains, it will continue to propagate itself?" Miki asked. "You don't understand. The Allosaurus and the Stegosaurus died out about 130 million years ago. 130 million years ago, this island wasn't here. This piece of regolith we're standing on was still part of the ocean floor before volcanic action pushed it up into the sunlight." Miki folded her arms. "So how do you explain the dinosaurs being here?" "I can't, although it's going to be easy raising the money for an expedition to find out." After another half an hour of hacking through the underbrush, they found the trail leading to the bunker. Hundreds of Godzillasaurus tracks imprinted the sun-baked dirt along the way. In minutes, they stood before the massive concrete edifice. The trail led to a yawning doorway that stood about 40 feet high. The group stopped to marvel at the engineering feat to erect such a structure in such unlikely terrain. Then Sergeant Nomura reached up into the tree, using his rifle as a pole to dislodge a ragged piece of clothing. It was hard to tell if the cloth were a part of a jacket, shirt, or pants. It was blackened with dirt and stained with dry blood. Miss Augusta wasn't kidding about dinosaurs eating people, he said, holding the bloody rag out for the whole squad to see, causing a bit of a stir. Yagato grabbed the rag and tossed it into the bushes. Let's move inside, 2 by 2. Sergeant, hold here with the civilians. Bring them when you hear my okay. The troops switched on their overhead lights and hustled through the large opening. The okay to enter came a minute later. Within was a chamber enormous enough to house a military cargo jet. Makeshift nests and straw littered the cement floor along with what appeared to be old lumps of feces the size of pineapples. Lovely. The door to the left permitted access to the interior of the bunker. It was locked, but that was quickly rectified with the butt of a rifle. Beyond the door was an unlit corridor. The group filed down the hall as they found a body, a woman in a white lab suit. She laid curled, seemingly asleep. The sergeant gripped her shoulder and turned her over. A murmur went through the troops. Miki spun away, gripping her stomach. The side of the woman's head was in contact with the floor, had been flattened. Her features were contorted as if decomposition was causing the flesh to slowly ooze. The floor was stained black where her skin touched the cement surface. Yagato pulled out a list of names and photos of missing persons, comparing the ID tag clipped to the woman's front pocket for the information in his hand. She's one of the missing scientists, he remarked. Dr. Susan Peterson, biologist. The state she's in, I'd say she must have been lying there for several weeks. Look at her skin. It's been burned from exposure to radiation. 2 more bodies, also on the list, were found further down the hall, another 5 after they entered the lead-shielded changing room. The switches by the doorways indicated the doors were were electrically powered. The fact the doors were open suggested the power in the complex had gone out. Beyond the changing room was a service tunnel. The sign hanging from the ceiling read in English, "Caution, moving vehicles." A forklift was parked along the wall with one of the cumberstone Godzillasaur's eggs atop its skid. The egg had hatched and the driver laid slumped behind the driving wheel, half eaten. The colonel stood at an arm's distance from the grisly corpse and checked the ID tag. "This man's not on the roster," he said. "He was probably just a hired laborer." The garage adjoined the service tunnel, housing a number of forklifts and small flatbed pickup trucks. A second sign hanging from the ceiling read "Hatchery," with an arrow pointing further down the service tunnel. Following the sign, they located a large room. Entering, they found clusters of metallic spider-like arms mounted to the floor. Colonel Sergeant Namura aimed his light at the ceiling. "What do you make of those?" Directly over each arm cluster was an energy beam projector. Of course, Mizaki worked on one of the clawed arms. They mounted the eggs on these and then subjected them to radiation from above. The window was set in one wall. A door hung half open beside it. Going through, the group discovered a laboratory with a control panel for operating the beam projectors. Mizaki found a clipboard. "Listen to this." He read from the pages. May 15th. Professor Lassalle's Radiation Application Theory. Test 8. Higher wavelengths produce larger specimens. Applying too much radiation too fast breaks down cellular structure, in essence dissolves them. Today we are going to back up. The colonel interrupted. "You said too much radiation too fast dissolves the Godzillasaurs?" "Godzilla was exposed to the A-bomb. It didn't dissolve him. That depends upon what power source they've been using and at what intensity." "Do the notes say?" Mizaki flipped through the pages and shook his head. "No, but we should find out they were working on. According to this, they had been irradiating a juvenile Godzillasaurus during its first growth spurt. It says here the results were phenomenal, but the specimen died. They have it scheduled for disposal, but the date coincides about when many of these people were first reported missing. If we find the specimen, the colonel surmised, we should find the equipment they were going to use to get rid of it. The signs on the wall made the pen easy to find. It rivaled the size of the chamber they first entered. The height was about the same, but the width was narrower. A stairwell spiraled up to a landing. Miki scaled it to the top. Below, her light faintly illuminated a baby Godzillasaurus bloated to the size of a whale. Its dead eyes were open a crack and shone dry and shrunken in the light. Its sides had been bloated and its tongue lolled out from its mouth. "Poor thing," she murmured. Over her radio headset, she heard the colonel talking excitedly. The soldiers had found a room further down the landing with another projector. He grumbled, announcing that neither the controls nor the projector gave any indication of the power source. Reconnoitering in the hall, Colonel Yagato split up the team. A sign by the elevators gave directions to the offices in the upper levels and the reactor below the base. He ordered Sergeant Nomura to accompany Miki and Mizaki up to the offices while he would take the troops below to see what happened to the director. Sorry about that, had some technical difficulties, so let's get back to reviewing the fanfic. With the elevators out of commission, the sergeant's half of the team climbed the stairs to the 5th floor. Here the builders of the complex had constructed modern office spaces. However, the offices were in such disarray, only incomplete files could be compiled. Most of the filing cabinets were locked and too sturdy to risk shooting them open. It wouldn't do to have bullets ricocheting. Mizaki resorted to removing hard drives from the computers. Sergeant Nomura collected as many as he could carry in his waterproof satchel. And I think they're like missing a comma or something in there. I don't know. The colonel radioed his progress in the lower levels. "We broke through the control room," he said. "It's clear a reactor failure was the source of their trouble. They had an automatic system that sealed this area off from the upper floors in an emergency. However, the system failed to close off the vents. The air was still being circulated through the complex hot with radioactivity. We found a manual release for the next door. We'll be going down one more level to see what exactly happened to their reactor. Be careful," Nomura radioed back. Making the best use of time, the sergeant recommended they search for employment records, contracts for constructing the base, and recipes for the equipment. Miki found some notes with a diagram of an egg with 2 infant Godzillasaurs curled inside. "Mizaki, what's this?" she asked. Mizaki looked at took the papers. "This is interesting. According to the notes they logged, they hatched a double-yolked egg." "A what?" the sergeant asked. "A double-yolked egg. That means the egg is going to hatch twins. Anyway, it says here," Mizaki traced the words with his gloved finger, "that the radiation they subjected the egg to fuse the embryos, forming a Siamese twin." He scanned ahead on the next page. "Oh," his voice dropped an octave. "Listen to this. Typically, the infant Godzillasaurus is docile. However, the Siamese twin demonstrated a streak of viciousness and deceptiveness. Our hatchery supervisor, Cumberman, was tending to the creature down in the pens. Till then, it protected an air of innocence, more so than any of the others of its kind. A number of us felt uncomfortable around the thing. We took a vote and elected to contain it in a separate pen. Our suspicions proved to be all too true. When Cumberman's assistant, Dr. Haley, checked on her, he found her lying on her back, Her sternum had been crushed and the flesh of her face had been ripped from the skull. The Siamese twin sat in the corner, projecting that air of naivety. However, the blood dripping from one of its mouths made its guilt all too obvious. The report, Mizaki concluded, wraps up by saying the creature escaped before it could be disposed of. Nothing was seen of it since. And this is why you don't fuck around with science. Miki rubbed the side of her arms as though although she was cold. Something wrong? Mizaki asked. What? She reacted surprised. No, I'm fine. That Siamese twin reminded me of a nightmare I had. Dream? Mizaki said. At least I hope it was a dream. Before Miki could clarify what she meant, the colonel spoke over the radio. Sergeant, he said, get Ms. Sagusa and the professor to the beach. There's quite a bit of steam pressure built up. The crane to the control rods is blocked. The thing is liable to... Colonel, one of the soldiers cut in. Look, the reactor. An explosion ripped over the radio speakers. Oh, that doesn't sound good. The floor of the office level buckled, knocking Miki, Mizaki, and the sergeant off their feet. Stunned, they collected their wits. Miki checked her decimeter and saw that the reading was well above the tolerance level of her protective suit. We have to run, she called into her mic, but her voice rang about in her helmet. The radios were knocked out. Sergeant Namura sat on the floor tapping the side of his helmet. His muffled voice cried out from within his suit. Colonel, do you hear me? Miki showed her decimeter reading to Mizaki. He scrambled to his feet and together they grabbed the sergeant. From then on, it was a run or die. They doubled back down the stairs and out of the building, crossing over the 2 kilometers of rough, hilly terrain in suits not meant for running. But one cannot outpace radioactive particles. Mizaki, being the oldest, was worse for wear. He collapsed when he reached the beach, falling into Sergeant Namura. Once down, Namura did not get up. Miki was the last to keep going. The ship was in sight. She waved her arms at the water's edge in hopes she would be seen, and then fell on her knees and pitched face forward into the sand. Even if she were rescued, Miki knew her time was up. She was going to die. With nothing else to lose, she popped the seals to her helmet and rolled it off her head. She breathed in fresh air like it was cool water. But the cruelest of life didn't seem finished with her. The ground reverberated from something large coming her way from the direction of the ocean. Because of the radiation exposure, she was too weak to focus her mental faculties to determine what was coming. Yet she was determined not to become a dinosaur's lunch. Drawing the .45, she cocked back the hammer. The creature burst from the sea, washing her in an onrushing wave. Wiping the water from her face, she looked up. Once she saw her target, she let the gun slip from her fingers. My day just keeps getting better and better, she moaned. Resigning to her fate, she lay there down on the warm sand and closed her eyes, exhausted. Towering above her was Godzilla. He announced his supremacy to the denizens of the island's jungles with a bellowing roar. Flocks of birds shot up from the treetops and fled to the other parts of the island. Godzilla looked down and saw her and her 2 companions sprawled on the shore. Despite her size, his predatory vision had been keen on detail. He recognized her. He also recognized Death's handiwork when he saw it. That energy he drew strength from was killing her. Bending down, he scooped her from the beach, and as the sand drained between his fingers, he absorbed the radiation from her body. Miki stirred, feeling as though she had crawled out of the deepest pit of sleep. Taking in her surroundings, she received a shock that nearly made her faint when she saw whose face it was looming over her. She gasped in fright. But then, was he harming her? Miki put her fingers to her temple, concentrating, probing Godzilla's intentions. This was the closest she had ever been to him. The proximity allowed her to see into his mind with perfect clarity. Sadly, there wasn't much going on in his mind other than his attention was focused on her, waiting to see what she was going to do. I don't know if gratitude means anything to you, she spoke, but thank you. I'm sure you saved me. Who else could have? Godzilla grunted. What? Miki reacted with surprise. His grunt seemed like a response. Then she remembered Mizaki and Sergeant Namura. They were still lying on the shore. "My friend," she pointed down to the beach. "Help them. Do for them what you did for me." She jogged his thoughts to repeat the same actions he did for her. He remained inert. Not until she nearly panicked did he lumber forward and scoop the two men into his other hand. Mizaki and Namura did the same double takes when they came to. "It's okay," Miki yelled, waving for their attention. "You can take off your helmets." She pointed to her head. "Remember, Godzilla can soak radiation." Hesitantly, Mizaki and Namura removed their helmets. "Are you controlling him?" Mizaki called over. "No," Miki called back. "Why would you think that?" "Because you've been asked so many times to find him with your EPS, it just seems like the next logical step." "How about getting him to put us down?" the sergeant spoke up. "Gently." "I'll try." Miki put the image in Godzilla's mind to bend down and set them on the beach. He interpreted it as letting them go, as in dropping them. Turning, he stepped back to the sea and dropped them so they could swim home. Miki tried to make herself clear as he slowly lowered his arms. They rolled out of his hands and splashed hard. Once Godzilla proceeded onto the shore as one of the helicopters lifted off from the ship and fetched Miki, Mizaki, and the sergeant out of the water. As the pilot lifted off, Miki and Mizaki gazed out the copter's port windows. Back on the island, Godzilla was wading through the trees towards the bunker. A column of ugly black smoke rose from the point in the jungle where the bunker was located. "Just think," Mizaki reminded her. "We were right in the middle of that." Hey guys, sorry for pausing right there, but I just needed to take a look and see how much more of this we had to read, and there's still a lot we need to go through. And seeing this episode's becoming a little too long for my liking, I'm just going to stop here. I know I said I was going to read the entire first part, but it's just a little too long, and I do apologize. Although I do think I've read enough to give my opinion about it. It's pretty interesting so far, I will admit. It's not the best. I'll let you know that now. There is some confusing aspects to it, some things that aren't really explained. Like, for instance, the whole time-traveling thing. A, how they get a time-traveling device, and B, how did they get back into the present time? None of that was really explained. But aside from that, it's a pretty interesting story, and if you guys want to continue to read it, go right ahead. The link's down in the description below. Well, I'm the FanFic Critic. I read it, you listen, and I'm going to go eat Chinese food. Jiminy Cricket, this is long. This is only one... Okay, you know what? Fuck this, I'm done. This is way too long. Until what?